For much of modern Christian broadcasting, Joyce Meyer's voice became a constant, steady, unmistakable, and reassuring. It entered kitchens during early mornings, followed drivers through long commutes, and lingered in quiet living rooms where people were too tired to argue with hope. To her audience, she sounded certain, grounded, resolved. She spoke as someone who had survived the worst and emerged not only intact, but purposeful. Over time, her presence became less like a preacher and more like a companion, someone who seemed to understand private pain without needing it explained. But voices can carry more than truth. They can also carry distance. And behind the tone millions trusted, there existed a woman whose inner life was shaped not by certainty, but by fracture. Long before the cameras, the microphones, and the global reach, there was a child who learned early that silence could be dangerous, authority could be cruel, and survival often required emotional numbness. The distance between who Joyce Meyer appeared to be and who she had once been was vast. And that distance, quietly maintained for decades, would eventually begin to close in on itself. Joyce's earliest memories were not anchored in warmth or safety, but in vigilance. Her home did not feel like a refuge. It felt like territory she had to navigate carefully. Raised during a time when obedience was prized over emotional awareness, she learned to read moods the way some children learn language. Her father's presence dominated the atmosphere, unpredictable and heavy, while her mother's quiet endurance taught Joyce a painful lesson. Survival sometimes meant pretending not to see what was happening. The abuse Joyce later described was not a single breaking moment. It was repetition, routine, and inevitability. What shaped her most was not only the violation itself, but the realization that no one intervened. No neighbor noticed. No authority arrived. Faith, when it appeared, felt distant and symbolic, something spoken about but not practiced in ways that protected her. By the time Joyce reached adolescence, she had already internalized a dangerous belief that endurance equaled strength and silence equaled maturity. These ideas would later resurface in her teachings, her leadership style, and her relationships, long after she had physically left that house behind. Leaving home did not feel like freedom. It felt like exposure. Joyce entered adulthood without a blueprint for trust, safety, or emotional regulation. The world beyond her childhood home was wider, but it was not gentler. She married young, driven less by love than by the need for escape. The relationship that followed repeated familiar patterns, control, instability, and fear disguised as normalcy. When that marriage collapsed under the weight of deception and legal consequences, Joyce found herself alone again, this time with responsibility and shame layered onto unresolved trauma. Survival had taught her how to endure pain, but it had not taught her how to recognize danger before it arrived. In the aftermath, she developed coping mechanisms that looked functional from the outside but were corrosive within. Anger became armor. Control became comfort. Independence became isolation. She was moving forward, but not inward. And the deeper wounds remained untouched, waiting for a moment when endurance would no longer be enough. When Joyce married Dave Meyer, the relationship did not begin with harmony. It began with imbalance. Joyce carried years of suppressed rage and distrust into the marriage, while Dave entered with structure, discipline, and restraint. The contrast created tension that would define their early years together. Joyce later admitted she was emotionally volatile, critical, and deeply unhappy, even when circumstances did not justify it. Dave responded with patience, but patience without boundaries can quietly become self-erasure. Their marriage survived not because it was easy, but because it was forced to confront reality. One moment, often recounted but rarely examined deeply, marked a turning point. Dave's quiet declaration that he would choose joy regardless of Joyce's emotional state stripped her of control she did not realize she wielded. It forced her to confront a terrifying truth. Her pain no longer justified her behavior. And if she did not change, she would lose the one person who had chosen to stay. Joyce's spiritual awakening did not arrive as comfort. It arrived as confrontation. Years after identifying as a Christian, she realized belief had not transformed her inner world. Her prayers had focused on external relief, changed circumstances, easier relationships, but not internal reckoning. The moment she later described as transformative was not loud or theatrical. It was quiet, deeply personal, and unsettling. It required her to accept responsibility for her emotional life without minimizing her trauma. That distinction would become central to her message. Faith, as Joyce began to understand it, was not about denying pain, but refusing to let pain dictate identity. This realization reshaped her inner narrative and eventually her public voice. Joyce did not begin teaching because she felt qualified. She began because people listened. Her early Bible studies were informal, imperfect, and emotionally raw. She spoke not as a theologian, but as someone actively wrestling with anger, fear, and self-discipline. That authenticity resonated. People recognized themselves in her struggle, yet teaching while still healing created tension. As her influence grew, so did the temptation to present resolution before it was fully lived. Her authority expanded faster than her internal processing, a dynamic that would later resurface in more damaging ways. Radio transformed Joyce's reach and her responsibility. Speaking into a microphone removed immediate feedback, replacing it with imagination. She could no longer see who was listening, only assume. The intimacy of her voice created trust, and trust created power. Listeners did not simply hear encouragement, they absorbed interpretation. Joyce's words shaped how people understood suffering, faith, and personal responsibility. That power carried weight she could not fully measure at the time. As her ministry expanded, there was little space to slow down. Television brought visibility, expectation, and scale. Joyce became not only a teacher, but a brand, an employer, and a symbol. Systems formed around her, insulating her from ordinary consequences. Success arrived faster than reflection. And with success came financial complexity that blurred the line between personal comfort and institutional justification. Money did not corrupt Joyce's message overnight. It complicated it slowly. Each justified expense, each rationalized benefit, moved the ministry further from the simplicity that had first defined it. Supporters trusted her intentions. Critics watched patterns form. Transparency lagged behind growth, and suspicion filled the gap. When investigations surfaced, the shock was not only external. Joyce was forced to confront how far the ministry had drifted from the vulnerability that once grounded it. Structural reforms followed, but trust, once fractured, does not heal through paperwork alone. Past teachings resurfaced, detached from their original context and re-examined through the lens of harm. Joyce acknowledged imbalance, but acknowledgement could not undo impact. Some listeners felt seen, others felt blamed. The divide widened. The tragedy involving a trusted staff member forced the ministry into a reality no platform can control. It exposed the limits of discernment and the danger of assuming stability where none exists. The legal resolution did not erase the moral weight. Joyce's grief over her brother was quieter, heavier, and unresolved. It reminded her that influence does not equal rescue, and love does not guarantee redemption. Some stories do not bend toward resolution. When long-standing broadcast relationships ended, the loss was symbolic. Permanence, once assumed, proved fragile. Audiences shifted. Routines broke. The ministry felt older, slower, and less certain. Leadership succession brought discomfort. Family involvement raised questions. Control loosened. The woman who once carried everything now had to let go. Joyce's later teachings grew quieter, less declarative. Certainty softened into reflection. The edge of command dulled into invitation. Endurance had built her platform. It had also exacted a price. Emotional armor protected her, but it also distanced her from others. Joyce Meyer's story resists simple judgment. She helped millions. She also harmed some. Both truths exist. Stripped of titles and reach, Joyce remains what she always was, a survivor still learning how to rest. Legacy is not decided by influence alone, but by what remains when influence fades. Joyce Meyer's life asks a difficult question. Can a story shaped by pain ever fully escape it, or does it simply learn to speak louder than it?